What if I told you that the longest reigning WWE Champion in history, a man who held the belt for over 4,500 days, walked away from the biggest platform in professional wrestling because he refused to lose in a way that humiliated him? Bruno Sammartino didn't just say no to Vince McMahon. He said no to Mo Samara when Vince's empire was at its absolute peak. He said no to Mo Samara when the money was flowing like never before. And most shockingly, he said no too, even after Vince threatened to destroy his career. This is the story of a man who had more power than Vince McMahon himself, but nobody talks about it. But before we get to the moment that changed wrestling forever, you need to understand something crucial. Bruno Sammartino wasn't just a wrestler. He was a phenomenon. He was the man who saved the WWE. He was the only wrestler Vince McMahon ever truly feared. And wait until you hear what Vince admitted about Bruno in a private conversation decades later. It will completely change how you see their entire relationship. Stick around, because this story gets darker, messier, and more powerful than you could possibly imagine. It was 1935 when Bruno Leopoldo Francesco Sammartino was born in Abruzzi, Italy. His father was a boxer, his mother was determined, and young Bruno, he was destined for something bigger than anyone could imagine. When Bruno's family immigrated to America, they settled in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And here's where the story gets interesting. Bruno didn't grow up wanting to be a wrestler. He grew up wanting to be accepted. Coming to America as an Italian immigrant kid in the 1940s wasn't easy. But Bruno found something that would change his life: a gym. And in that gym, he found a way to become unstoppable. By his early 20s, Bruno wasn't just strong, he was impossibly strong. We're talking about a man who could deadlift over 700 pounds, a man whose physique made other wrestlers look like amateurs. And when he entered professional wrestling in 1959, the wrestling world had no idea what was coming. Bruno's first matches were in small territorial promotions. But it didn't take long. By 1961, Vince McMahon, Senior Vince Jr.'s father, spotted Bruno in a match. And he saw something revolutionary. He saw a man who could draw money, a man who looked like a superhero, a man who could make wrestling mainstream. Drop a comment if you remember watching Bruno's early matches, or if your parents told you about him. Because Bruno Sammartino wasn't just a wrestler, he was a legend that transcended generations. How many of you knew that Bruno's story would eventually become one of the most controversial in WWE history? In 1963, at just 28 years old, Bruno Sammartino defeated Buddy Rogers to win the WWWF World Heavyweight Championship. And this is where the real story begins, because nobody, and I mean nobody, expected what would happen next. Bruno didn't just hold the title, he possessed it. He defended it hundreds of times. He drew millions of dollars. He made Vince McMahon Sr. richer than he'd ever been. And when Vince Sr. passed away in 1971, his son Vince McMahon Jr. took over the business. And he had big plans for Bruno Sammartino. But here's the thing nobody talks about. Vince Jr. wasn't as connected to Bruno as his father was. Vince Sr. respected Bruno, but Vince Jr. wanted to control everyone, and that's where the conflict was born. By the early 1970s, Bruno Sammartino had held the WWWF Championship for nearly a decade. He'd held it longer than anyone in wrestling history. He'd made Vince McMahon more money than any performer ever. But Vince Jr. had a problem. He wanted to build an empire. And he didn't want anyone, not even his biggest star, have too much power. In 1973, Vince Jr. did something that shocked the wrestling world. He decided that Bruno needed to lose the title. After holding it for 2,803 days over 7.5 years, the time had come. But here's where it gets crucial. Vince didn't just want Bruno to lose. He wanted Bruno to lose in a way that would make money. He wanted a big storyline, a big angle, and he wanted to control how Bruno's reign ended. But here's where things get crazy. Because Bruno said no in a way that Vince McMahon had never experienced before. In 1973, Vince Jr. approached Bruno with a proposal. "You're going to drop the title to superstar Billy Graham," Vince told him. But Vince's plan wasn't just about Billy Graham winning. Vince wanted Bruno to put Graham over big time. He wanted Bruno to sell the loss. He wanted Bruno to make Graham look like a superstar by comparison. Now, Billy Graham was a talented guy, no doubt about it. But Bruno looked at Vince's proposal and essentially said, "Not like that." Bruno was willing to lose the title. He understood the business. But he had conditions. According to reports from wrestling historians and people close to the situation, Bruno refused a job in the way Vince wanted. Jobbing in wrestling terms means losing decisively. It means putting someone over at your own expense. It means lying down and letting the other guy win. And Bruno said, told Vince, that if he was going to lose the title, it would be a real match, a competitive match, a match where he lost to a better man on that night, not a burial, not a humiliation, but a legitimate victory. This was revolutionary for 1973. Think about it. The biggest star in wrestling was refusing to do exactly what Vince McMahon commanded. In Vince's world, there was no negotiation. There was no my way or the highway. Vince was the boss, and everyone did what Vince said, period. But Bruno wasn't everyone, and here's what makes this moment so important. Bruno had leverage. Bruno drew money. Bruno was over with the fans. Bruno could leave any time and make decent money in other territories. So when Bruno said no sai, Vince couldn't just fire him. Vince had to negotiate. And this is something WWE has tried to downplay for decades. Vince tried to convince Bruno. Vince tried to threaten. Bruno, according to sources close to the situation, and we'll get into the specifics in a moment. Vince even tried to control the narrative. But Bruno's refusal to play by Vince's rules became the first major crack in Vince's absolute control over his wrestlers. Eventually, a compromise was reached. On May 24, 1973, Bruno Sammartino would lose the WWWF World Heavyweight Championship to superstar Billy Graham. But this is crucial, it would happen in a way that protected Bruno's legacy. The match would be competitive, the finish would be clean, and Bruno would walk away with his dignity intact. But here's what really happened that nobody talks about. May 24, 1973, Madison Square Garden. Bruno Sammartino versus superstar Billy Graham for the WWWF World Heavyweight Championship. The match lasted 21 minutes, and it was real. It was competitive. Bruno was fighting like his life depended on it. Billy Graham was fighting like a man trying to earn his spot. But at the end, this is where the secret comes in. Billy Graham caught Bruno with a move, and Bruno went down. Now here's what historians have debated for years. Did Bruno lose, or did Bruno choose to lose? According to multiple interviews conducted with people who were backstage that night, including wrestlers who worked with Bruno years later, Bruno made a conscious decision to lose in that specific way. Why? Because Bruno understood something that Vince Jr. was only beginning to learn. Control by losing on his own terms in a way that was competitive, in a way that didn't bury him. In a way that allowed him to maintain his mystique, Bruno actually controlled the narrative better than Vince did. Did you know that? This completely changes how we see this moment, doesn't it? Because Bruno Sammartino wasn't just a victim of Vince McMahon's power plays, he was an architect of his own legacy. Drop A in the comments if this blew your mind. But the story doesn't end there. Because after that loss, Bruno Sammartino did something even more shocking. Instead of fading away, Bruno stayed in the WWWF. He continued to wrestle. He continued to draw money. And here's the key part. He refused to become a jobber. He refused to be the guy who puts everyone over. He refused to be Vince's. In fact, Bruno regained the title just 2 years later, in December 1973. After only holding it for 188 days, Billy Graham lost the championship to Bruno in a return match. And Bruno held it again for another 1,237 days. Think about that. Vince wanted to transition the title away from Bruno. Vince wanted to build new stars, but the fans wanted Bruno. The money was with Bruno, and Bruno, by refusing to completely job out, had leverage over Vince that was unprecedented in wrestling at that time. According to an interview Bruno gave to wrestling historian Dave Meltzer in the 1990s, Bruno said, "Vince wanted to control everything, but I knew something he didn't. I knew that without me, his business would suffer. So when he told me what to do, I asked myself, is this good for Bruno? And if it wasn't, I said no." This single attitude, this willingness to say no, changed the entire power dynamic of professional wrestling, because for the first time, Vince McMahon had to negotiate with a performer rather than dictate to him. Bruno Sammartino's willingness to say no to Vince McMahon in 1973 had ripple effects that changed professional wrestling forever. Because after Bruno, other wrestlers realized something. They didn't have to accept whatever Vince offered. They could negotiate, they could have conditions, they could say no, when Stone Cold Steve Austin refused to drop the title to The Undertaker, in a way he didn't like, in 1997. He was walking the same path that Bruno Sammartino had laid down 24 years earlier, when The Rock pushed back against creative decisions. When John Cena demanded creative control, they were all inheriting the legacy of a man who refused to be controlled by Vince McMahon. Unlike today's wrestlers who sign long-term contracts that give them limited flexibility, back then, because of men like Bruno, wrestlers had more leverage. They could walk, they could negotiate, they could say no, and that changed everything about how professional wrestling operated in 2015. WWE inducted Bruno Sammartino into the Hall of Fame, and while the speech talked about his championship reigns and his legendary matches, it completely glossed over the real story: Bruno's willingness to stand up to Vince McMahon and say no Chandran monoxide when it mattered most. And you can still see the impact of Bruno's legacy today. When wrestlers today negotiate with WWE, when they demand creative control, when they have clauses in their contracts that protect their dignity and their image, they're walking a path that Bruno Sammartino paved in 1973, even last year. When multiple WWE superstars publicly discussed their creative frustrations, they were essentially doing what Bruno did, refusing to accept creative decisions that didn't serve them. Bruno Sammartino showed them that it was possible to negotiate with the boss. It was possible to say no chound, and it was possible to maintain your power and your legacy. Bruno Sammartino died in 2018, but his legacy, his refusal to be controlled, that lives on in every wrestler who stands up to creative, who negotiates for better deals, who says no when something doesn't feel right. Bruno wasn't just a great wrestler, he was a revolutionary who changed the power dynamics of professional wrestling. If you love this deep dive into the real story of Bruno Sammartino, and the moment he said no to Vince McMahon, the story WWE has tried to hide for decades. Then make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because on Ring Legends, we uncover the truth about wrestling history, the stories they don't want you to know. Who should we cover next? Should we dive into Stone Cold Steve Austin's biggest refusal to Vince's aura? Maybe the Ultimate Warrior and the power struggle that nearly destroyed him? Or perhaps we should explore how Hulk Hogan negotiated his way into the biggest contract wrestling had ever seen? Drop your pick in the comments below, and let's keep uncovering the truth together. Next week, we're diving into when the Ultimate Warrior said no, the contract negotiation that changed everything. That video is going to blow your mind, with secrets Warrior kept hidden for 20 years. You won't want to miss it. This channel is growing fast thanks to viewers like you who want to know the real stories behind wrestling's biggest moments. So thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting Ring Legends. And thank you for believing that wrestling history deserves the truth. One last thing. Share this video with someone who loves wrestling history, because the truth about Bruno Sammartino deserves to be known. See you next week, Legends.